Okay, so get ready, because this one is pretty intense. We're going deep on John Wayne Gacy. The killer clown. I mean, you've heard the name, right? You know the nickname. Chilling stuff. But there's so much more to this story. Like, a lot more than just surface creepiness.
Oh, yeah. It's a case that really gets under your skin. I mean, Gacy built this totally, normal life. Businessman, community leader. They even had his picture taking with Rosalind Carter. And all while he was committing these horrific acts. I mean, the psychology of this guy, it's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
Seriously, it's like a nightmare, you know? Makes you wonder, what secrets are hiding right in front of us. We think we know people, but should we really?
And that's the question that, hang over this whole case. And it all starts with Gacy's childhood, a seemingly normal upbringing on a surface. But when you dig a little deeper...
There are some cracks, right? I mean, especially his relationship with his dad. It was...
Oh, incredibly difficult. His father was an alcoholic, abusive, physically and verbally. Imagine growing up with your dad just constantly telling you you're worthless, you're dumb, stupid. He even, taunted Gacy, saying he would grow up queer.
Wow.
Yeah, devastating stuff.
I mean, that kind of emotional abuse, it has to leave scars, I mean, it just makes you wonder how much of Gacy's darkness came from that early trauma.
Yeah, and on top of all that, Gacy suffered these blackouts when he was a kid, and there's a good chance he had an undiagnosed medical condition too. So you take all these factors, combine that with the abuse, it must have had a huge impact on shaping his psyche. But, and it's important to remember this, a troubled childhood, it doesn't excuse what he became.
No, absolutely not. It's like a super complex puzzle. No easy answers. But then you see Gacy seemingly thriving as an adult. He gets married, manages KFC restaurants, joins the JCs, builds a successful construction company. It's like he's overcompensating or something, like trying to prove something.
Right, that duality is a big part of understanding Gacy. He created this image of, a respectable, successful guy while hiding this incredibly dark side. The question is, was it all an act? Or was it some deeper psychological compartmentalization?
That's a good question. It's almost like he was living two totally separate lives. And that's where the Waterloo incident comes in, his first conviction, right? For sexually assaulting a teenage boy.
Yeah, that was a pivotal moment in the Gacy story. It exposed this pattern of predatory behavior, He used his position in the JCs to target young men.
And even after they caught him, he insisted he was innocent, blamed it on politics.
Right. Denial and manipulation, that became a hallmark of Gacy's personality. He always deflected blame, created this whole narrative about how he was wronged and misunderstood. Even when they had all the evidence, he clung to his own version of the truth.
Well, he did serve time, though, right?
He did, but he only served 18 months of a 10-year sentence. He got parole in 1970, and this was after a psych evaluation diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. A very disturbing diagnosis. And yet, they let him go.
Wow. Just back into society. And he goes right back to Chicago, gets married again, keeps building his business, and starts to create this persona of being a good guy, helpful neighbor. This guy was throwing huge summer parties. Hundreds of people would come. I mean, can you imagine the secrets hidden behind those barbecues and games?
It's chilling to think about. And it was during this time, under this guise of normalcy, that Gacy's dark urges really started to escalate. Yeah, and that's when things get really strange. That's when the killer clown persona emerges.
It's like straight out of a horror movie, isn't it?
It is. It's really disturbing. So Gacy joins this local clown club, and he creates these alter egos, Pogo and Patches. It's like this crazy contrast, the symbol of joy and laughter. But behind it all is this incredibly dark secret.
Yeah, it's like the clown becomes a symbol of fear, like hidden evil.
Exactly. And he used this persona to, gain access to kids and young men. He'd perform at parties, hospitals, even charity events. It's like this blurring of reality and fantasy. It was the key part of his whole MO.
So, while he's out there entertaining, he's also luring victims back to his house.
Yeah. He would promise them work, money, sometimes just companionship. Then once they were inside, he'd use handcuffs, often pretending it was a magic trick to subdue them.
It's hard to even imagine that level of premeditation.
It's chillin'. He'd torture his victims for hours, sometimes days. He even had this twisted method he called the rope trick.
Ugh, I read about that. It's too awful to even talk about.
Yeah, it's really disturbing. It involved a tourniquet and a hammer handle. And the way Gacy described it, it was so casual. It was nothing. He talked about it when he was recounting his first murder. 16-year-old Timothy McCoy.
The kid, lured from a bus terminal with the promise of a place to stay.
Yeah, and Gacy claimed it was self-defense, but the evidence tells a different story. It was after McCoy that Gacy admitted to experiencing the ultimate thrill from taking a life.
And then the murders, they just escalate.
Right, it becomes this horrifying pattern: lure, torture, kill, and then hide the bodies in the crawl space under his house. I mean, the level of compartmentalization is insane.
It's mind-boggling. How did he keep this going for so long?
Well, eventually it all starts to unravel. The disappearance of 15-year-old Robert Peist in December 1978. That's what finally brought the whole thing down.
T.S. told his mom he was going to talk to a contractor about a job. That contractor was Gacy.
Right, so the Des Plaines police, led by Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak, they start looking into Gacy's past. They find out about his previous sodomy conviction in Iowa. That's a huge red flag right there. And during that first search of Gacy's house, they find all sorts of disturbing stuff: police badges, handcuffs, books on homosexuality and pederasty, even a class ring that wasn't his.
It's like they were stepping into a nightmare.
And get this, while all this is going on, Gacy is under surveillance, but he actually has dinner with the detectives who suspect him of murder.
Wow, what nerve.
He was so arrogant, like he was convinced he could outsmart them. He even sued the police for harassment.
Unbelievable.
But the detectives weren't buying it. They talked to former employees, and these employees told them about some pretty unsettling things, like Gacy asking them to spread lime in the crawl space, and then there was the search dog. It had a death reaction in Gacy's car.
So they're closing in.
The walls are closing in, and as the evidence mounts, Gacy starts to crack. He's meeting with his lawyers, has a couple of glasses of whiskey, and then he just confesses, says he's killed at least 30 people.
Just like that.
Just like that. And the way he describes the murders, it's chilling, so detached. He dehumanized his victims, called them male prostitutes, hustlers, liars, as if that somehow made it okay. He even claimed that he would sometimes wake up and find dead, strangled kids in his house. Like it wasn't him.
It's like he created this alternate reality.
A horrifying world of his own making.
So this confession, it leads to a second search warrant.
Right. And this time, the police find the truth. The horrifying truth. The first bodies are uncovered in the crawl space.
Oh my God.
It was gruesome. The crawl space was packed with the remains of young men. Many of them had been tortured, and the smell was overwhelming.
It's just incomprehensible. How could he live with himself with all those bodies buried right there?
It's a question that still haunts investigators to this day.
So they find all these bodies and the truth is out there, and then the trial begins. And his defense team tries to say he's insane, right?
Right, exactly. They tried to present him as this like Jekyll and Hyde character, a guy with multiple personality disorder, paranoid schizophrenia, argued he was driven by these compulsions he couldn't control, said he wasn't really aware of his actions.
But the prosecution didn't buy it.
Nope, not at all. They argued Gacy was totally sane, that he planned everything out, that he knew what he was doing. They had witness after witness, and each one just painted this picture of Gacy as this master manipulator, a cold, calculating killer.
Did he ever show remorse? Like any humanity at all?
Throughout the whole trial, he was just so detached, like he was watching someone else's story. He denied most of the murders, said he had accomplices. He even tried to appeal directly to the judge, said his own lawyers were twisting his words, always trying to control things.
Wow. And eventually the jury sees through it all.
Yep, guilty on 33 counts of murder, sentenced to death for each one committed after Illinois brought back the death penalty.
But even on death row, there's still this mystery. He keeps telling these stories about more victims, about burying bodies other places. It's like he wants to keep the terror alive.
Yeah, it's like he needs that control, even facing death.
So do you think those claims are credible? Could there be more victims?
Well, some investigators think it's possible. Remember those travel records? They showed Gacy was out of state for at least 3 of the murders. And there are inconsistencies in some witness statements.
Like Robert Young. He was with Russell Nelson right before he disappeared.
Right.
What happened there?
It's a question that remains at...
And there are still the unidentified victims. They only identified 28 of the 33 bodies they found.
Yeah, and they released those facial reconstructions to the public,
hoping someone would recognize them.
And thanks to DNA, there have been some breakthroughs. William Mundy was identified in 2011, James Hakinson in 2017, and then Francis Wayne Alexander just a few years ago.
It's amazing what technology can do. But there are still victims out there with no names.
And that's what's so unsettling. We may never know everything.
Like how many he really killed or where the other bodies are.
It's like a dark cloud hanging over the case.
This feeling that there's more. Something we haven't uncovered yet.
Gacy's case, it reminds us that monsters can look ordinary. Evil can hide in plain sight. Makes us question everything.
Yeah, it's terrifying. It makes you wonder who you could trust, who your neighbors really are.
I think that's the legacy of John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, the fear, the secrets, and the fact that we may never have all the answers.
And that is something to think about.